3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Internet! It is Matt from the Dorklords, along with the Brothers Arda, otherwise known as the Brothers Krynn, Joe and Dan, up from Canada. It is a pleasure to have you, gentlemen, here in the Dorklords channel. The very first ever grand inaugural live stream. So let's just see how this goes. Woohoo!
It's an honor.
That's right, Hasbro Jangles. A hobbit hole. That's where I'm sitting right now.
Great background.
Chicago's got plenty of them.
Just to really quickly comment, I may not be the biggest fan of the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings movies, but I absolutely love the design that they did for Bilbo's hobbit hole, Bag End. So I love the background. I love the background.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Yeah, in fact, I think when they created it for the Lord of the Rings, it was a set, and so they tore it down after the movie. Well, then when they were coming back to do The Hobbit, from what I understand, New Zealand said, "Fine, you can rebuild there, but you have to make it a permanent structure. Therefore, we can bring tourists." Anyway, so they did.
Smart idea of theirs.
Anyway, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, Joe came to me with an idea. He said, "Hey, why don't we do chapter by chapter recaps, discussions for the Lord of the Rings, and we'll do like once will be on my channel, once will be on your channel, and we'll just take turns." And so we did chapter 1. It went off great on Brothers Krynn, and now we're doing chapter 2 here, and then we're going to schedule chapter 3 in the near future, and we'll ping pong it back and forth. So it's my turn to host this time. Yep. But yes, this time we are talking about chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past.
I've got another page full of notes for everyone to see.
Oh yes, I've got my notes on the computer, on the Hobbit hole computer right there. And I'm gonna let Joe kind of keep us running through the chapter here. But just as a quick little intro, this is it's an exposition chapter, is what it is. Gandalf kind of catches us up on past events, lays out what needs to be done. And I feel like in lesser hands, these type of like an info dump type of chapter can drag. But Tolkien is a master, and so his joy at giving us glimpses into this vast history of Middle Earth really comes through. So it's really engaging, even though it is exposition heavy.
All right. So we start off chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past, which I actually like this title, as we are under the shadow of the past, really. Not to put too fine a point on it. The past, that is to say, Sauron and the war that came long before, the era in which Frodo and Bilbo and their friends and family lived in. And the first thing to note, that at least on the page 42 of the edition I have, which is the Red Book edition, nice. I've got a hardcover copy, but it's packed. Now, the talk in the Shire in Hobbiton did not die down after 9 or even 99 days, it is said, which I find that funny. I thought rumors were supposed to last for 75 days. This one outlasted that in 99 days, apparently. The most amusing thing about this first page is that It's revealed that Bilbo went on to become a figure of legend who will appear with a explosive sound and a flash and appear with bags of jewels and gold. Clearly, he became Santa Claus, Scott Calvin. So
Bilbo Claus.
Yeah. Evidently, Tim Allen should have been cast as Bilbo Baggins.
Are you sure it's not the Easter Bunny? I mean, the Easter Bunny does bring goodies yearly.
Yeah, sorry, we had to crack fun at Tim Allen. I grew up with the Santa Claus movie, so I have to poke fun at him.
So long as we don't have the Mullinator.
I'm a Nightmare Before Christmas guy myself, but there you go. All right.
Okay. Well, Nightmare was great as well.
And Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas, best Christmas movie of all time. Changed my mind, Gozer.
Prancer.
Fair enough. Emmett Otter, man. All right, anyway, just saying.
Prancer was dark, actually.
Okay. Okay.
That movie was
All right,
dark.
so we've got Bilbo. He has been gone for a while.
Yep.
And in his place now, Frodo is kind of suddenly is like he's the Baggins of Bag End all of a sudden, and kind of fitting into that role.
And it's a role that Frodo is surprised to find himself in. And the next year, he does the 100-weight feast, which apparently falls short of the mark. But apparently, he's mostly hanging out with Folco Boffin and Fredegar Bolger. Fredegar, I believe, is also known as Fatty.
I've got Fredegar Bolger, that guy. Yeah, it was like Fatty Bolger. That's an unfortunate nickname, but he's listed. We meet him here first. He is a friend, listed as a friend of Frodo, although it says his main friends are Merry and Pippin. Yep. But I did a video actually on Fredegar, aka I'm calling him the fifth Beatle of the Fellowship. This guy is inches away from being a major character throughout the series. He does have a large part to play anyway, as it is. But, I feel like if there had been 10 members of the Fellowship, let's say, instead of 9, if they'd been like, let's get a 10th, let's get one more than the Nazgul.
Well, there is that meme circulating on the internet. What was it? I think you had Aragorn thinking, I wish I had another sword, or Boromir thinks that. And you have Gandalf thinking, I wish I had brought another hobbit or two.
All right, if he had,
would have been one.
Fredegar Bolger would have been that hobbit because he is in this group. He's in the 5 hobbits, as we'll see later. Not that far ahead, a couple of chapters from now, he'll make the decision not to go, and he stays. But it's a choice, and if he had made the choice to be like, you know what, let's go. I'm heading to Rivendell with you. This guy probably stays in the books and becomes part of the Fellowship. So. He's that close to fame, I guess, is my point. You think about people that might have been the 10th member of the Fellowship, maybe somebody like Glorfindel, because he was there at the council, maybe Faramir, if he'd have gone in place of Boromir. And then Fredegar Bolger, he's right there.
Conan the Cimmerian, if the rights had been allowed to wait.
Had the rights been allowed. Little crossover event. I know you guys do a pretty thorough Conan recapping, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
yeah, true? Yeah. We tend to do Conan stuff on our Brothers Krynn now. And we're still working on some of the details for a Conan in Lord of the Rings as the 10th Walker fanfic thing. But that's necessitating endless amounts of months of research and reading of both Hour of the Dragon and Lord of the Rings. So
very nice. I thought I would, I know you guys are, Conan is close to your heart.
Yep.
And yes, Hasbro, take Fatty Bolger over Glorfindel any day. Let's do this. Fellowship. Anyway, he does great things and actually is quite heroic in his own way. But it's just this is where we first get him name dropped, and then we don't, we don't hear from him for a little bit.
Yep. Oh, there's a great comment from Gozar the Gozerian. Could have been a contender.
That's right. Yeah, I could have been a contender. Oh, Fredegar Bolger. In fact, again, a spoiler, but at the very end, during the scouring of the Shire, he is held prisoner, and he's one of the people that's freed. So he was trying to lead a rebellion against Sharky Saruman, and he loses so much weight that the nickname doesn't fit anymore. So as well as his clothes. So yeah, what is best in life? That's a great crossover with Conan. Crush your enemies. Eat 7 meals a day. 11 seas. Hear the lamentations of the women. Right,
and
anyway.
to see their chefs driven before you.
That's right. Okay, so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
Frodo,
but I was like, Frediger, we gotta call out Frediger and give him his props.
Yeah, he does need to get his props. As Frodo is aging, though, as it's revealed on page 43. Sorry if I go page by page, people. I need it for the structure.
We're doing it. That's what we're here for.
Frodo doesn't age. And he inherited
the
that
rings have an effect.
So naturally, there's people complaining about how some people have all the luck. But in reality, I'd say it's more misfortune he's inherited from Bilbo. As well, we all know what's the cause for this well-preservation.
We're going to see a little bit later in this chapter, too, that he can't bring himself to even attempt to destroy the ring. So the ring is having a big effect on him already. Yeah. And Frodo is someone probably with the strongest amount of will after maybe Samwise, but Sam is a different case. That's a conversation for another day, for a later chapter. But Frodo has an incredible amount of force of will. And he's a regular Hal Jordan, just to refer to Green Lantern from DC Comics. But the problem with Frodo is that he has set before him the One Ring, which can be can have quite an effect on people. And it's also becomes apparent that Bilbo, not Bilbo, why do I keep saying Bilbo? Frodo, sorry, force of habit, too many book clubs with the Bilbo Jr. or whatever, yeah.
Well, he almost got named something like that. But Frodo is rapidly becoming a figure of rumor and whatnot. And there's rumors, speaking of which, as Frodo is nearing his 50th birthday, rumors of Mordor's growing power is starting to pass through the Shire. As the Shire, which is typically fairly cut off from the rest of the world and isolated, is becoming aware that there's a larger world out there. As the larger world is coming into contact with the Shire. And as you pointed out, Matt, this is going to have an effect much, much later in the book during the scouring of the Shire with Sharky and whatnot.
So you got elves, you got dwarves, you got lots of different folks passing through.
Yep. And the White Council apparently ended up storming some of the old strongholds, and there's talk of how the Dark Tower has been rebuilt. Orcs are multiplying again in the mountains. Trolls were abroad, and that's just reading a little from the book. So obviously, just to refer to the popular 80s fantasy series, where the town of Solus became aware of the outside world because of dark doings and rumors of dark armies and nefarious individuals rising and dark towers being built. Dragonlance is borrowing from Lord of the Rings here, as the hobbits are hearing talk of this awesome force that's growing in the east.
Really interesting, too, there with the trolls. So the quote is, trolls were abroad, no longer dull-witted, but cunning and armed with dreadful weapons. And so, first of all, it's a nice tie into The Hobbit, right? So we're like, remember the trolls of The Hobbit, William and Bert and Tom, and they were kind of slow and stupid. And so they're saying, the threat has grown. The trolls are no longer Bert and Tom. And so I'm guessing this is a reference to the Alag High, the trolls that are kind of superior version of trolls that have been bred by Sauron himself. And so anyway, so we're just seeing the threat level is increasing, but it's also a nice tie into The Hobbit.
Yeah. What you pointed out is quite right. Thank you for pointing that out. I actually had something like that in my notes, and I really appreciate it. And I think it's This is Tolkien as a writer, just to analyze that a little. In The Hobbit, he set it up as a children's fairy story. And now what he's doing is he was told by the publishers, we just want Hobbit 2, nothing more. Tolkien wanted to write a grand epic. So what he's doing is he's kind of compromising between the two desires. But here he's already planting the seeds for the grand epic. He's going to, le grand romance, so to speak, to use a Southern French term, that he's wanting to write, this chivalric epic. And so he's planting the seeds with the trolls here. This is Tolkien getting his own way. And it's important that he plant the seeds here. It's also important for sequels, because sequels either need to be in the shadow of the original or surpass it. Tolkien's setting the bar higher than The Hobbit. So it's important that he plant those seeds. Sorry for going on a small tangent.
No. This is the spot to talk about that stuff, because it's early in the book. He is doing this as an exposition, chapter, and that exposition is including these events that happen in The Hobbit. So this is his attempt to make this link between this fairy tale and this epic. And how does he do it? Of course, he's Tolkien, so he does it perfectly. But yeah.
But and then we get the conversation between Ted Sandyman and Sam Wise Gamgee. Samwise being one of my favorite hobbits. I love Sam.
Well, in many ways you could make the case he's maybe the most important character in the Lord of the Rings. I mean, obviously Frodo can lay claim to that, but
there's a case that's not that. I mean,
I know exactly.
All right.
I'm back. He's the anyway, but yeah. So this is where we're meeting Sam, and it's in some ways we're hearing about various members of the Fellowship to Be. We hear about Merry, we hear about Pippin. We're going to hear briefly about Aragorn. He's now throwing in the Fellowship for us, and here's Sam.
And Sam, we first hear about him in the first chapter from the Gaffer.
Right, we get a name drop.
Gaffer.
Yeah.
I love the Gaffer. I'm a bit of a writer, and so I based, I think, 1 or 2 characters off the Gaffer. I love him. I'm a bit of a fanboy of his. Anyways, actually, we get in now, just for those who are not used to the English of Tolkien's day, Tolkien and even Howard wrote in a more Victorian style. So that, for example, you get Sam who says, "Queer things you do hear these days, to be sure." Now, today we think of the term queer as in homosexual or something. Back then they thought of the term queer originally means strange or odd. So I just want to kind of say, when entering Lord of the Rings, enter with the mindset of Victorian England. They didn't think of queer as in homosexual. They thought of queer as in weird. And who knows what the term weird, which itself had a darker connotation 1,000 years ago, but who knows what it'll mean in 100 years. So if by then people are still listening to this recording, hi, and don't take our usage of the term weird too badly. I'm joking. But, speaking of Hal Jordan, we now get a reference to a cousin Hal who works for...
Yeah, right. Cousin Hal.
At Overhill.
Who's seen something rather amazing.
Yep. And there's talk of how the elves are headed east. Headed west. Whoops, sorry. They're headed west, and they're heading for the harbors beyond the White Towers and beyond, and they're headed for the Grey Havens, from which at times elven ships set sail, never to return, is the quote. And they are sailing over the sea. They are going into the west and leaving us.
I really like that little bit there where Sam, it's a chant, it's a song that he's heard at some point, maybe as a kid. And when he hears about, the elves are sailing to the west, it puts into his mind the sailing to the west. Like, it's kind of an interesting, I like that. It puts him in mind of a song that he then has to finish. It's kind of a fun moment there.
And that's a literary effect to emphasize something, to repeat the word sailing and sailing and sailing.
So it's quite the distance.
Exactly. It's quite the distance. It's quite the hardship that they're going through.
Well, sorry to interject. I believe from the Grey Havens to Tal Arasea in the west, you have the Great Sea. So that is quite the distance.
It's not a day trip.
No.
It's gonna take a while
Although,
for sure. But we're also getting that this is more lore, right? We're hearing at it. We're hearing about the elves and their pull to go west from a couple of hobbits sitting in a bar. I mean, that's kind of a fun thing too, where you're like, oh, it makes this world so much bigger with just a couple of lines. And then but Cousin Hal has supposedly seen something approximating an Ent.
Yep. And that, sorry for jumping straight to the elves. Yeah, he saw something that resembles an Ent, a tree that's been walking around. And that is planting seeds for Treebeard. So Tolkien's doing a lot of seed planting. And I hope people, or I should say acorn planting. I hope people appreciate a bit of that pun there.
By the way, Edwin Boyette's story time was just commenting on our talk about Sam being, and he says Sam is objectively the hero of the story. That he's the everyman who rises to the occasion to do extraordinary things. Everyone else is an exemplar of the race. Sam's extraordinary quality, and he finishes it off, is loyalty and love for Frodo. Well Wait, put.
Hold on, Edwin Boyette, isn't that? Wasn't his channel at one time Middle Earth Storytime?
If so, welcome, Middle Earth Storytime. Love to have you.
I was such a huge fan of his channel. I loved that channel. He introduced me to Howard.
Oh wow! Okay, well, okay. Well, here I'll show you. Oh it is. Small world.
It was his reading of. Sorry, real quick.
Go for it.
I forgot the title for the moment. Of when Conan climbs up the tower and confronts the one elephant alien creature. That was the first story I ever heard of Conan, and it was such a sorrowful tale. The Elephant Tower, that's right. And oh my gosh, and I've listened to you read so many other stories. I am very delighted to have you.
Apparently he's working on the Two Towers right now, so there you go. Yeah. Yes, and Hasbo has brought up the theory that, as he put it, he said he's talking about the Ent seen by Hal. He says, is it one of the missing Entwives? Popular theory. Agree, that is a popular theory. I feel like we may have an answer to that, though, from Tolkien's letters. But you want me to jump into that or no?
Go ahead.
All right. So, we've got got this anthropomorphic tree. Looks like an elm tree that's running through the North Farthing. Mm-hmm. And, you got some folks, Sandy Man's like, you're crazy. And so there's this thought of like, as we know, we, the audience, we, the reader, are going to find out later, oh yeah, there are anthropomorphic trees that go around. And so this is, again, foreshadowing what we're going to find out. And so we have this, obviously, the Ents, they lost the Entwives, and it would make some ways perfect sense. If you lost them, they're somewhere you're not. So they're hanging out the Shire. But we do have this letter where somebody asked Tolkien basically that question, like, where are the Entwives? You say they're gone, the Ents can't find them. And so he wrote, and again, letters, I don't know how canonical letters are. I mean, they're not 100% canon, right? It's just, but it is at least Tolkien's state of mind at one time, and the guy who came up with the story is thinking this is my version of events at this moment. And so in that version of events, he says, I think that in fact the Entwives had disappeared for good, being destroyed with their gardens in the War of the Last Alliance, when Sauron pursued a scorched earth policy and burned their land against the advance of the allies down the Anduin. They survived only in the agriculture transmitted to men and hobbits. Some, of course, may have fled east or even have become enslaved. If any survived, so would they indeed be far estranged from the Ents.
I think it
So,
makes sense.
yeah, it's also, by the way, I do love the fact that he says in this letter, somebody's asking him a question, he's writing his response, and he says, if any survived. You're like, well, did they? I mean, you're the author, which is great. It's just part of this, I don't know, it's just one of the quality of his works that it's as though the history of Middle-earth transcends the author.
I think
he's just a scribe writing down events, and he's not actually making them. It's just great. I love it.
But I think this falls into him wanting to create mythology, not fantasy. But I also think that his state of mind is that it should also be left to the imagination of the readers. There needs to be, at some point, them taking the story unto themselves and deciding for themselves what they want from it. Now, 50% it should be the author, 50% the reader, I think. Oh, and just to jump to the chat, apparently I can't even pronounce that.
Bojangles. Good friend of the channel.
His first intro, and I'm glad you're enjoying the discussion, Edwin.
Nice. And for Homebody, he put out this comment. He said, "Indie Geek," who I actually he invited me on his show once, which was quite an honor.
I've had him on my show once.
Very nice. He thinks that the being that was seen by Hal is a troll, apparently. Interesting theory. I think that's a totally reasonable theory because we don't know the answer. If I were to pick a theory that I thought might be the most likely, I think we get a little bit of a clue in that in a couple of chapters, not far from here, we're going to meet Old Man Willow in the nearby old forest.
Now, just to steer the discussion towards one other thing, anyways, Sam, just the latter half of his sentence about sailing, there is one other thing I wanted to get your opinion on with this quote. They are going into the West and leaving us. Funny how Sam has that knowledge that seems to enter him. I'm not sure he knows where it's from. Well, he says, well, I don't know. But it's interesting that on some level he knows the elves are going away and they're never coming back.
Do you think that it was part of this song that he learned and that maybe, it's just like inherent in that text, somebody taught him that song, perhaps, if it is indeed a song. And maybe that's, I don't know, but yeah, that's a good point.
I think I remember, I don't know if we talked about it last time, but the Celts, all the Celtic people in some way at one time, be they French, be they the Celts of Ireland or Scotland and Wales, believed that music was a sort of magic and that it arises from within every individual. But it's also a creative force in the universe. And so I wonder if maybe the music, the song here, arose from within Sam, and that in some way the knowledge may be transmitted to him, but it's coming from deep within him, and that he knows on some level that the elves are sailing away and will never return.
As Snapdragon mentions, he says he probably learned about elves leaving Middle-earth from Bilbo. I think that's a good shout.
That makes the most sense.
Also, you do get the sense of, not that they would have known that they were sailing, but you have elves passing through the Shire toward the sea and then never returning. And so you're like, whoa, they went somewhere. They didn't come back, in other words, but yeah.
I think my point was, I also had the sneaking suspicion there might be, we got to bear in mind, Ulmo has a lot of influence, such as when Frodo dreams of water at one point. So we don't know how much of this is stemming from Ulmo, but I do think that the more likely theory is Bilbo, as everyone's rightly pointed out. But I do like this second half and how Sam's almost in a trance about it. So that's where I had the notion, I guess, there's something off there.
Yep. Just to go back real quick to the possible Ent or Entwife or troll.
Yeah.
So I think it was a Huorn. I'm going with the Huorns. We don't know as much about the Huorns as we do about the Ents. And we have this quote from the Two Towers. I'm jumping ahead. Spoiler, Two towers. Sure. But you get the conversation where it says, it was the Huorns, or so the Ents call them in the short language. Treebeard won't say much about them, but I think they are Ents that have become almost like trees, at least to look at. They stand here and there in the wood or under its eaves, silent, watching endlessly over the trees. But deep in the darkest dales, there are hundreds and hundreds of them, I believe. And so Huorns are potentially Ents that have become more tree-like over time. Perhaps Old Man Willow became so tree-like that he became stationary. He could be potentially a Huorn himself. And, you know, we just don't know a lot about them, and I guess that's why you could plug a Huorn into that story. And if you go back far enough in time, at one time, Fangorn and the Old Forest were connected by one giant woodland. So theoretically, you could have a patch of Huorns that are now separated from the Ents because the forest in between got erased. Anyway, so there we go. That's my thought.
Homebody.
Right. Thank you, Edwin. He says Bombadil's Forest and Fangorn are continuous. Yep.
And Homebody has a great comment here about, I always understood that Tolkien presented the history of Middle-earth as found histories that he translated long before found footage films. Looking at you, Blair Witch. Well, what's interesting is that both Tolkien and Howard both had the same frame narrative, where this is a body of text and literature or history that they found and they translated into the modern English language. Although, ironically, both of them depict it as a red book that they discovered and they've worked their entire lives to translate. Although Tolkien calls it the Red Book of Westmarch, Howard mostly called it a collection of sagas, or the history of Hyboria. So it's interesting that they both happen upon the same frame narrative, which is fascinating. And Jung would have a field day, as would Campbell.
Alexander
and you mentioned just to mention you and Dan's influence. You mentioned Celtic history and French Celtic history. You guys are, if I'm not mistaken, French Canadian, yeah?
Yeah.
That apply? So you have a background and a love of French mythology as much as maybe anybody. So just to say, that's an awesome kind of influence into this whole discussion.
We tend to look at things from the point of view of being French. And for example, I have copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey, for example, in both French and English. Although I prefer my French edition these days because, but yeah, anyways.
Even our folk music up here in French Canada, there's a lot of it that has in common a lot of that Celticness.
Oh, yeah.
So
we're not too far removed from the Celtic side of the French. Well, French France is just simply a country that was originally Celtic, got colonized by the Latin culture of Rome, and the two just mixed together. So it's half Celtic, half Roman. So it's a Romano-Celtic civilization at its core. And that said, apparently, over the course of the next few years, Gandalf visits a few times and disappears. But Frodo's not able to get too much info out of him because Gandalf's more
tight-lipped.
Yeah. And it's, well, eventually after 9 years, I think, where he went away and came back after, of course, I said, I think 9 years. Oh, yeah, it was over 9 years since Frodo had seen or heard of him. And he had begun to think that the wizard would never return and had given up all interest in hobbits. Yeah,
and just to point out, we mentioned it mentions his 50th birthday is coming around. And so we know that in the chapter 1 party tree, Bilbo disappears. That was Frodo's 33rd birthday. So we're talking 17 years. That's a pretty big difference, for instance, from the films, where you get the idea that all that stuff happens in a rather truncated fashion. It is 17 years between party tree party, Bilbo leaves, and what we're about to get, which is this exposition from Gandalf. So that's a huge amount of time.
Yeah. Oh, and well, Dan Edwards points out, not too sure about the history of Faust. Yeah, the thing about our history is there's more to it than just Celtic and Roman, but that's a shortened version of, well, the foundation.
You got the Vercingetorix or whatever. Anyway, but
yeah, that's exactly
cool
it.
folks.
But Mark Scheib.
Oh, good. Hasbo points out 17 years.
We're not wannabe elves.
Hasbo's lifetime.
The elves want to be us.
The Grey Havens runs a ferry service to Quebec. Exactly, Edwin.
So the Grey Havens runs a ferry service to Quebec. Well, funny, there's actually a ferry service that, well, runs from some French islands to Newfoundland. So, yeah, funny you mentioned that. Kind of a thing. So there is
good point, Mark, about 17 years not being that long a time for hobbits. I mean, it's still a fair amount, right? I mean, they live to about 100 without a ring aiding them. So yeah, still 17 years is a bit, and also it's not like a season has passed. Frodo has come into his own. He is now the master of Bag End. He has his own reputation now that's quirky. And so, yes, anyway, he's 17 years. He might have even thought, 9 years since he last saw Gandalf. There might be a sense in him. There's a bit in earlier where he is wondering whether he should cross the river. He wants to journey, and he's like, maybe I should cross the river. And some part of him says, like, not yet.
Yes.
And I assume that part of the not yet is like, well, I probably shouldn't go until I hear from Gandalf. But, 9 years go by. You might at some point think, maybe I'll never hear from Gandalf.
And it's interesting because Frodo ends up deciding that maybe when he's 50, because 50 is a significant number, because that's when Bilbo got whisked off on an adventure. Spirited Away, one might say, just to reference a Studio Ghibli movie. But the thing here is, he ends up thinking, maybe I should go. No, not yet. It's interesting that he has that insight. I think Joseph Campbell, the renowned mythologist and student of Carl Jung and mentor to George Lucas, would say this was Frodo's third eye, kind of discerning what was the right path for him and following his instinct, his, I don't know what it's called, but like his son esprit incarnate, his internal spirit, like knowing what's the right path for himself, that he has, following his bliss, knowing.
Thanks, Edwin. By the way, Edwin's ducking out, but he just mentioned it was a good discussion. He's going to come back and watch it later. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us, Edwin. Appreciate it, sir.
It was a pleasure to have you. Love your channel. And if I wasn't doing this stream, I'd be going off over there.
No, stay here. Stay. What?
No. We'll stay. We'll stay
or we'll go.
I can't decide. Anyways, Frodo. Oh, I lost my place. But anyways.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to make you lose your place.
No. It's all right. It's all right.
Oh, well, while you're looking, just to focus, jump on your point. When he's talking, has this moment of time. You mentioned the third eye. I think is what you're talking about. But you could also put down Frodo's this inner voice saying maybe not yet. Could be the Took side of him versus the Baggins side of him. That the Took side wants to go exploring, and the Baggins side, the more pragmatic side of him, is like, hold off, you're not ready. And so perhaps there's a little bit of that there too.
There's also that aspect. The thing about Tolkien is he was aware of these archetypes and of the hero's journey and whatnot, though it was published in 1949. He was already aware of a lot of these ideas. So you can kind of look at it both ways. And that's the beauty of Tolkien. There's always, you can read it in 3 to 4 different ways and they never conflict. He was a very special writer. And honestly, there's almost no comparison.
There's also the fear of the unknown.
There's also that you could read into it. I think it's all these factors. And that said, okay, now I remember my place. That sounded weird. Anyways, I found my place here in the text.
Found your place.
Gandalf points out, it is far more powerful than I ever dared to think at first. Now, he says this the morning after his arrival, and after he's thinking about a certain spring day nearly 80 years before. But he begins the story of the Elven Rings with Eregion, which anyone who's familiar with Eregion knows that's an entire story in itself. Long story short,
The poem you read for our intro.
Yeah. Long story short, Galadriel and Celeborn were the lord and lady there. Then they got kicked out. Celebrimbor took over, having been manipulated by Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, or otherwise known as Sauron. Then Celebrimbor, when Sauron left to go forge the Master Ring, went off and confessed his sins to Galadriel and said, here's the 3 elvish rings. I didn't know it was Sauron. Sorry. Can I be forgiven? Now, he then, rather than, when he had the chance, he could have stayed away from Eregion, but he, as captain, wanted to go down with the ship. So he hurried back. Elrond gathered a force to go help out. And, of course, Elrond arrives too late. And Elrond is ultimately repulsed. And thus begins the war of, I believe, the elves and Sauron. And Sauron, despite some trouble given to him by the dwarves.
I like these coughs, homebody. Cough, Anatar. Celebrimbor. I have a feeling these are perhaps Rings of Power references. Coughs. You should look after that cough, homebody.
But the thing is, Eregion is ultimately destroyed, and Sauron, of course, has his one banner, which is the corpse of Celebrimbor, which is horrific, but it has to be mentioned as this is a darker side of the Legendarium. As like I remember coming across someone recently, and I think it has to be specified that Tolkien's Legendarium. Now, I'm not saying this to be political. Tolkien's Legendarium is not meant to be safe, so to speak. It's supposed to be good. Like the idea was likely was, like Aslan is good but not safe. And so you have Tolkien, who, this is pretty dark stuff. Like I don't think I'd go as far as to say grim dark, but the very fact of someone being run through by a spear and then using that as a banner is pretty barbaric. And the thing is, Sauron ultimately was winning the war against the elves until the Númenóreans weighed in and massively shifted the balance of power towards the elves. And that was Tar Ministar, I think it is, along with his mighty admiral, who, alongside the king, ended up
kind of did the show up just in time, in the nick of time, before all was lost. Yeah, back in Station. And then, of course, time passed. You had the downfall of Numenor. Then you had this, eventually, you get this War of the Last Alliance, which we get a reference to here in this chapter. And that is where the ring is cut from Sauron's hand.
Yep. And it's now, just to get back to the drama of the characters, we then get Gandalf, who mentions that Bilbo.
By the way, I hear you, homebody. You're not the only person that sometimes has an issue with the Jackson films as well. Homebody's like, homebody's a book gal. So I hear you. I appreciate the films, but I have several friends who are like, yeah. So
I'm a book purist, so I don't like any.
All right, there you go.
I have mild issues with the movies,
but
such as everything.
Yeah, but I find adaptations are a tricky business. It's more important to capture the spirit of it than get everything correct. But I find that I don't agree with the Jackson films almost on anything. So, but I understand they've introduced, I think, millions to the books. So on that angle, I think they've done the world a great deal of good.
Great point.
So I guess I'm more middle ground. And I will admit that I remember the Theoden actor from Hercules' Legendary Journeys, and I love him. So, and he was always my head canon. He's how I imagine Theoden. So they did get that right. They got Theoden right. But anyways, it's mentioned that Bilbo had been feeling thin and stretched, and that this is a sign that the ring was gaining control over Bilbo. But we know from the first chapter when Bilbo gave away the ring that this is, the very act of giving away the ring showcases the amount of force of will Bilbo had. And yet he was feeling thin and stretched out. So this is a pretty big deal. And now it's interesting, but Frodo, I don't think fully realizes immediately just what an accomplishment this is for Bilbo.
Right. Yeah. I think you're about to read the quote that I was thinking about with where Gandalf's basically, as far as I know, Bilbo alone in history has ever gone beyond playing and really done it. I mean, he needed all of my help. So yeah. It's a supreme act to really check off in the boxes for Bilbo's character resume, the ability to pass that ring in chapter 1.
And I think what also, I don't think we mentioned it last time, but I think it also needs to be entered in. People need to bear in mind, it was the ultimate act of love in some ways on Gandalf's part to rescue Bilbo from this, to dig into Bilbo's soul almost and extricate the ring and convince him to get rid of it. So that, in a way, Gandalf redeemed and saved Bilbo, and before it was too late. And this is a beautiful act on Gandalf's part. So I think it also cements Gandalf as just one of the ultimate heroes. Just that he'd do that for his friend from the opening chapter.
I'm laughing at this crossover that Homebody mentions. I fully believe that even Trek Phaser 1 from the original series would destroy the ring. Okay, and Gohira. All right, you're going to die on that hill, so be it. We're going to talk in a second about ways that the ring cannot be destroyed, but apparently, according to Homebody, they didn't test a phaser. I think there's probably a reason they didn't test a phaser, but yeah.
But on page, let me see, just checking my notes. We also get reference to how the two stories in the next few pages between Gollum and Bilbo kind of seem similar in the whole birthday gift and Precious, with the initial version that Bilbo told his friends being that he was given the ring, and this gives him some sort of legitimacy over it. And Gollum's story as Smeagol and Deagol, as far as that goes, was to give, Gollum altered the story to give himself legitimacy over the ring.
Yeah, he rationalizes it. Well, it was my birthday. Obviously, it was my... Yeah.
Even though hobbits are supposed to give gifts on their birthday.
Right.
But the thing is, this is the power of the One Ring kind of manipulating the minds of those they gain. Should I say the ring gains possession of, or that the person gains possession of the ring? Because with this ring,
I suppose the ring gained possession of the person, because we do hear that the ring does seem to choose, or at least have some volition in who its wearer is.
All right. Now Dan has never read the book before, but there's one line I really want to run by him that Gandalf mentions, and this is also one I want to run by you, Matt.
Sure.
I might perhaps have consulted Saruman the White, but something always held me back. Now, we as the readers know Saruman becomes Saruman of the Many Colors and falls from grace. And now Dan's seen the movie, so he knows Saruman, played by Christopher Lee and whatnot. But something in Gandalf always held him back from consulting about the One Ring and about Bilbo possibly having it, from consulting with Saruman about it. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think
Once again, we have this instinct with Gandalf. And, well, with Gandalf rather than Frodo here.
I think a part of it is that sometimes we're scared of knowing the truth, and I think Gandalf.
Oh, you mean that he was scared of, because he knew deep down that Saruman had fallen.
Yes.
Okay.
That sometimes, yes, you could figure out, you could have all the knowledge up here, but sometimes you don't want to admit that it is right, and so, that can be a very scary thought.
Because if he tells him about that Bilbo might have, well, that Bilbo has a magic ring that makes him invisible, Saruman, who knows more about the One Ring and that it renders people invisible, will act against Bilbo. And that will not end well for poor little Bilbo.
We see a rivalry between Gandalf and Saruman. It goes back, not in Lord of the Rings, but in some of the other books. I feel like it's in Unfinished Tales. But there's a whole section of these different White Council meetings that had happened over the years, and every time these White Council meetings come around, there's this obvious rivalry between the two of them. And in fact, I think at one point Galadriel is trying to make Gandalf the head of the council, and kind of gets overruled. There's a bit where Gandalf, they're talking about what to do about Sauron and in Mirkwood, I think at the time.
Yep.
And there's Tolkien describes it as Gandalf is sitting in front of Saruman, blowing these smoke rings, and basically questioning in a very subtle way. He's questioning Saruman's motives while blowing this giant ring, just to kind of go, I know what you're actually about. Like, there's a sense that Gandalf always was suspicious of Saruman's motives. Not enough to say, oh, that guy's, a villain, but to say, yeah, I think your agenda is not the agenda of the rest of the council. And so that's kind of where I think that kind of came about.
And it's interesting that the One Ring, though nowhere near Saruman, became ever larger in his mind, just as it did for Bilbo and Gollum when it was near those two. So that, in a way, I guess, even from a distance, the ring is corrupting Saruman. It's just one of those interesting things with the character. And on page 49, we get reference to how Sauron wants revenge. And Frodo goes, revenge? Revenge for what? And it's, well...
I like this quote real fast from Mark, where he mentions that Gandalf said, this is in a later chapter, but that he would not have gone to Saruman had he sensed any kind of deceit from Radagast, which he didn't, because Radagast himself was deceived. So maybe you could even put that into Saruman's gamesmanship. Well, I know if Radagast goes, you won't be able to detect my deceit. So anyway,
pretty much.
Good call, Mark.
And we get Gandalf revealing through the fire the poem, one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. And it's at this point that Gandalf reveals. Now, this poem is all written in Elvish, and we see the Elvish text in the book. And Gandalf, of course, translates it into Westruun, I believe it is, the common tongue, and reveals that this is the master ring, the one ring to rule them all, and that this is the source, to an extent, of a great deal of Sauron's power. in that Sauron greatly desires it, of course, but it's also worth mentioning that on page 51, Gandalf calls him by a rather peculiar title that I don't think was in the Peter Jackson movies, Sauron the Great, which
considering Sauron is in itself an insulting name, it's just funny to go the abhorrent great or whatever.
Yeah. And what's notable about the Great title is you look at now, for example, you look at Western civilization. Let's just go to French history. Charlemagne, Carolus Magnus, Charles the Great, or you look at, for Anglo-Saxons, Alfred the Great, both of whom merited their titles, but both of them did an incredible amount of service to their people and did everything they could for their people. Sauron never did any of that for anyone else but himself, although he deluded himself into believing he was doing it for others. But the strange thing about Sauron is a lot of his accomplishments are impressive, and he does have a lot of accomplishments. But it's interesting that Gandalf calls him the Great, a title that might be something that Mordor might call Sauron, but you wouldn't think of anyone else calling him by.
Right. It is kind of an odd little title to bestow on him in that moment.
He is great, but not good.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Great in his power.
Yeah. I think, I like that. Now, if you ever hear of a ruler generally being called great in human history, generally they're good to their people because, they accomplish great wonders and accomplishments. See Charlemagne or, Alfred and whatnot. There's very few rulers ever given the title of great, and that's for a reason. It's a very unique title.
I like this little comment here for Gozer. Alexander the Great, Ozymandias, look at my works, ye mighty, and despair. Yeah.
Actually, Alexander, given that he was fairly violent and did little, given his abuse of his army and his men, and how he killed a great many of his generals, arguably he might be a good point of comparison to an extent here. Not good, but great.
By the way, real fast, a question that Joe had earlier in the chat. Yes, Saruman did create his own ring.
Yeah.
We see him wearing it at one point. Later, we'll be covering that chapter at some point. But they're basically he's attempting to recreate the Great Rings with not the same results, basically.
No, because he's not Celebrimbor and Sauron in the guild of ring forgers. The trouble is Saruman could probably achieve the same results were he to include others in his little venture. But the trouble is he wants everything for himself, so his selfishness ultimately means he cannot create great rings like the elves were.
Yeah, he has the same patron Maya spirit, Aule, the blacksmith. So he does have that interest. But his works to date have not equaled those.
Yeah, because his pride and his selfishness means he can't bring himself to share in the glory with others. Which the difference between him and Sauron is Sauron was willing to manipulate others to do his dirty work.
Right.
But Saruman, while willing to do this, is too selfish. And the thought of manipulating maybe the dwarves and maybe some of the elves into collabing on such a project, he can't. I don't think his selfishness and his pride allows him to. So this is where Sauron truly is greater than Saruman, because Sauron has, in some ways, far less pride than even Saruman. Although he does have his own pride, his own ego and narcissism.
Yeah, he has his pride for sure. But I got you.
As Cicero once said, all is vanity.
No, he's willing to pretend to be this magnanimous creature in order to gain other powers. You don't see that so much from Saruman. Eventually you see this Sharky, but even Sharky is more controlling and less I don't know, deceptively, superficially nice while being terrible.
Yeah, and yeah. But it's also interesting that a lesser fire reveals the poem, so to speak, or the words written on the ring, but it would require a greater fire to destroy it.
Right. So we get this reference to and Caligon the Black.
Yeah.
I remember when I first read that, I was like, what? Who? What? And I had to, basically at the time I didn't have the internet back in the day, so it was harder to look that stuff up.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, and Caligon the Black has a very rich history. Mightiest winged dragon of the time, maybe ever. Likely the largest dragon. And Ayarandil slew him in the War of Wrath with the help of a Silmaril. But apparently, even his fiery breath could not melt the ring. So he's not a Star Trek original series phaser.
And hey, this is proof that Gojira could not melt it, because if Caligon the Black could not, neither could Gojira.
Okay, so be it. You're making a comparison there. All right.
Well, it's because Homebody brought up Gojira earlier.
That's right. No, great point. Yep, we're in simpatico with the chat.
But now Frodo asks a really good question on page 52. Why wasn't it destroyed? That's a good question. And Gandalf tells him it was taken from him. The strength of the elves to resist him was greater long ago. Now, in the current age, the elves are vastly weaker. And they not only lack a figure like Gil-galad to bring them all together, but they also have declined very visibly and are no longer a great force on the continent, sadly. The only ones who are really still mighty are really Galadriel, Celeborn, and Elrond. And I guess to an extent Thranduil. But the trouble is...
you got to throw in Círdan in there as well, baby.
Yeah. Although Círdan's greatest force lies not in physical might or anything.
Sure, we don't see him fighting, but yeah.
I'd argue him it's more wisdom. He has a different sort of strength.
And you got Glorfindel hanging out. I mean, the elves who have been to the west obviously do have, kind of a leg up on those who didn't.
Yeah, Glorfindel does certainly have the strength of old, and then some. But the trouble is, wherever he goes, he's like this giant sun just walking around.
Good point, Mark, about Círdan being in battles in the First Age.
Yep. Círdan rocks. He's probably the second best out of all the elves of this age.
It's one of those where, it's another great thing about Tolkien. You have this amazingly important, influential character that really isn't that influential in this story, but he is in the mythology, and he's there, and we know what he's doing. But in terms of like page for page, you don't see a lot of Círdan in Lord of the Rings, but you know he's there, and he has this rich history. And it's just Tolkien being awesome.
Now, I don't know if I'm going to get eaten alive for this next comment by Dan, because he's a bit of a Marvel fan, or at least classic Marvel fan. Now, Middle-earth did not have posers like Captain America and Bucky Barnes. They had Gil-galad and Elendil the Tall, who ended up overthrowing Sauron. I'm joking there. I'm joking. That's a reference to
the posers
of Cap and Small Cap. I don't know. Like, Bucky goes through superior identities like some people go for clothes.
Winter Soldier.
But yeah, Winter Soldier is one of them. There's Bucky, just that. And anyways, Dan's into the golden age of comics as well as more recent ages, so he's sometimes telling me about it.
And it's a pity Kif Kanan isn't here either.
Oh, Kif Kanan from Dragonlance. I love him.
My Dorklords partner Paul is a big Golden Age comics guy too.
Well, that's good. So we've got two of them You and I are cursed, Matt. We have to listen to the Golden Age comic book fanboys. I'm joking.
Nothing beats the classic Golden Age Human Torch.
Okay.
All right, fair enough. He could probably melt the ring. There you go.
Probably. But he's not there. So Gil-galad and Elendil have to make do with just killing Sauron.
Hey, Joy, by the way. Joy just jumped into the chat. Good to hear from you, friend of the channel.
The two kings fall, and it's Isildur, son of Elendil, who ends up cutting the ring from Sauron's hand. But now, in the book, there's no mention to any scene like in the movie where he goes, no. But
oh no, it's a fantastic bit actually. That I want to see this somehow played out. It's from, I believe, Unfinished Tales. There is the entire story written out of the disaster of Gladden Fields. It's gripping, cinematic. It's amazing, and they. I mean, I get it. In the interest of time, they just, Jackson, for instance, didn't cover it, but yeah, no, it wasn't Isildur hanging out at Mount Doom waiting to throw the ring in. No. He's on his way to hand the ring to Elrond, and whether he'll actually do it when he gets the chance, who knows? Because he dies en route.
But when he claims it, he claims it's Vergeld, payment for the loss of his brother and father. But the thing is, this could be argued that it's already the ring warping his mind. Now, Isildur was the greatest of heroes of his generation, or at least one of them.
The films do him a little dirty, frankly. He's a pretty heroic figure. Yeah,
he's almost, in D&D terms, the ultimate paladin at one time. His accomplishments go up and down his arm. Both of his arms, actually. But the trouble is that the ring takes hold, and you have, of course, the tragedy of the Gladden Fields, which, honestly, I've read that from Lost or Unfinished Tales, and I just... Oh my gosh!
It's so. I mean, it really is heartrending. His sons are killed, all but one of them. His son basically orders him to leave. You go save the ring. I'm gonna die and give you time to leave. And he has to say goodbye to his son. And oh my God, it's whoa, it's traumatic.
Dan's never read The Disaster at the Gladden Fields, but yeah. Isildur.
And there's also, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. There's this great moment too when he's crossing the river and the ring slips off his finger in the river. Is where eventually Daigle finds it. But and this moment when it leaves him, there's a moment of oh, I lost it, and then this relief comes over him, this weight of this, essentially this addiction is now it's gone. And he has only a few moments to enjoy it before he's shot with an arrow.
The right word. It is the right word to use. Addiction is the perfect word to describe the problem with this ring, and the way it takes hold. Although, I was just going to explain to Dan. You remember the quote from Flashpoint History? How no father in no place should ever have to bury their son. Well, I think Isildur buries 3 in one day, and one of them ends up telling him, "Go, abandon me, father." We'll hold off the orcs, and it's a heartrending scene as Isildur breaks down, realizing he's failed his sons, kisses one of them goodbye, and flees. We're gonna have to do a book club of just that, you and I, Dan.
I would love to see that depicted. It's an amazingly emotional scene, and it's just it's really really well done.
I'd want some Beethoven or some Mahler music on there, or John Williams.
Humble Gamer mentioned he hadn't seen chapter 1, our chapter 1 recap. I have a playlist here on Dorklords, and I included the one we did on your channel on that playlist. So if you go to our playlist, you'll find the chapter 1 recap that we filmed on Joe's channel.
And if you want, Dan and I also did a episode 1 recap just between us, because he didn't show up for the stream, so we did that in video form, and that's on, I think, the Brothers Arda already. So I'll
add it to the playlist. Home court advantage, exactly, Humble Gamer.
But anyways, we get the whole story of Smeagol and Deagle, where I hope I pronounced that right. And Smeagol ends up sadly strangling Deagle, who was rather more, I don't want to say disabled, but not, he was, I guess disabled might be the right word, but he ends up strangled to death by the side of the river after he finds the One Ring. And Deagle was already getting possessed by it. And Smeagol strangles him. They're supposed to be really good friends, but
I think there's an implication too that the fact that Smeagol acquires the ring through murder instantly has he has a moral failing leading into getting the ring of that nature, that it overwhelms him in ways that perhaps by Bilbo acquiring it the way he did, finding it is less. I don't know. There's a less of an immediate effect on his soul, basically.
I think that you're onto something here. I think that the fact that Gollum claims it, and he does it for murder, and Bilbo remains pure in a way, so to speak. We're supposed to juxtapose the two as complete opposites.
I've actually heard a thing that you could tell a lot about a ruler by their first edict.
Okay. And the first thing
in other words, I see what you're saying.
So the first thing
act.
Yeah, the first act with the ring, you're saying, is what kind of defines them. Okay, I'm just going to want to run through the characters a bit. Isildur, the first thing he does with it is essentially he just carries it around for a while.
And we get the sense that he is amenable to the idea that it needs to be destroyed. Now, whether he can actually do it when the time comes, that's apparently he couldn't.
I don't think he could have.
So he maintains some core of himself, in other words.
Yeah. Smeagol murders Deagle and then starts pulling nasty pranks on the locals and his village, the village he lives in, until he's chased away, and he's given the nickname Gollum because of the sound he makes of Gollum. Bilbo saves himself with it because he's in a life and death situation. Frodo just holds on to it for a while. Frodo inherits
it's freely given to him.
Yeah, Frodo, though, weirdly, the first thing he does with it is nothing, rather akin to Isildur. I wonder if we're supposed to make that connection between Isildur and Frodo. In that there's a kind of connection in that both of them preserve some part of themselves apart from it and try to do nothing with it for a long time till they're forced.
Isildur describes the pain that he experiences when he wears the ring, even that he doesn't want to wear it because it causes him this pain. Anyway,
I wonder if that's partly the Númenórean side.
That's a good point.
It makes me wonder why. Yeah, one of the first things Frodo did was put it on a chain.
Right. He mentions that in this chapter. He says, Gandalf describes how the ring can change shape and fall off, and Frodo mentions, that's why I decided to improve it by putting it on a chain. But I think you're right. There's also a sense of I can have it without having to wear it, keep it close without wearing it.
It's also notable that when the time comes to try to destroy it, Frodo immediately puts it in his pocket afterwards, not even thinking about it. And that's
Homebody. I do like that Gollum reference. I agree too. Like a created creature.
I think that Tolkien was giving a nod there.
Joy's asking, why did Boromir get affected by the ring? That's a good question. I mean, obviously he didn't have possession of it, but
I think that there's two reasons. One is on the writer's end, Tolkien needed to show someone getting corrupted by it. You need to have it have an effect. On the other hand, arguably Boromir is one of the greatest of the Nine Walkers. He's certainly the most battle tested. He's the character who best fits the traditional hero archetype in a way, as one might be able to perceive in the Victorian literature tradition and French literary tradition. Boromir has a lot in common with D'Artagnan from Les Trois Mousquetaires, the Three Musketeers, at least in personality. So he's brash, he's got this temper, he wants glory, but he's also a deeply loyal and good person at his core. So it's twisting him because he's so great. He is arguably, at the start at least, one of the greatest of the walkers. So it's having a quick effect on him because of his greatness.
I think there's also a sense of, we know that, for instance, with the poem that's in this chapter, 3 rings for the Elven Kings, 7 for the Dwarf Lords, 9 for mortal men. The 9 rings are all in use, and we've got the Nazgul, and so humanity perhaps is the most corruptible of our groups. And
Exactly.
So the human of the party is the one who, succumbs to this idea of like, wait, in his mind, these rules that are being imposed, you have to destroy it. You can't use it. It can only be used for evil. I think in his mind, he's like, well, my city needs defense. You're telling me this story, but I don't have any. I can easily rationalize that you guys are just stupid. I would like to use this ring to defend my city. And therefore, it's right there. I can just take it from this guy who is nowhere near my physical abilities. And then I've got the ring. Let's do it. And I feel like there's that eventually he succumbs to that nature.
Yeah. And we got to bear in mind, though, Boromir's first reaction when Frodo escapes him is regret and horror at what he's done. Boromir, deep down, is a great guy. He's overly loyal and patriotic, but he's looking at things in purely the material world, like in a purely pragmatic, practical sense, as you pointed out, Matt. And this ultimately is twisted by the ring. He's looking at it as a physical war, in a way, thinking just to reference Star Wars, he's thinking like a general. Gandalf is thinking like a Jedi and is looking at things from the perspective of the Force, so to speak. But in reality, Gandalf is looking at this as the real war is to get rid of the ring. Once the ring is gone, we have won. Boromir looks at things in terms of armies and soldiers and warriors. So ultimately, he's susceptible because he doesn't believe in a way. But he does come to be a believer to an extent right before he dies. And Boromir is arguably one of the most important of the walkers because of his death.
And I did a video recently about Boromir, in that my view on Boromir has changed over the years. When I first read the books, I saw him as basically a villain, someone who was weak-willed and fell to the power of the ring. And it was so obvious. And why didn't they look, it's that guy? But over time, as I've reread the books and I've gotten older myself, I have a lot more empathy for Boromir and his attempts to do the right thing. And he's struggling to be, and he's a fallen hero, basically, is what he is. Yeah. He's not a villain. He is a tragic hero.
Now, I'm just going to quickly come out in disagreement with Girl Next Gondor on one thing. She maintains the opinion that had Boromir lived, he would have fallen again. I maintain the view, no, Boromir, now that he had been properly humbled, had he lived, he would have been the most loyal right-hand man to Aragorn. He would have proven himself because he was fully redeemed, and that any belief that he would fall again is to say he didn't really mean his redemption or his last words, that this was but a temporary thing.
Homebody mentions that mind meld that Galadriel pulled on him didn't help matters. Good point. Good point, no. Homebody.
But Boromir would have gone on to I think he would have undergone a similar character arc as Aragorn. But the problem is, he'd have been a superfluous character. So
that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. I thought you're right. I think you're actually right that he would have turned a leaf and got. I have thought about the idea that if Boromir had survived, that if you come to the end, when instead of Faramir handing over essentially the keys to the city
It would have been
to
Boromir.
Aragorn, it would have been Boromir having to make that choice. And I feel like Boromir might have been less happy about passing over the right to rule the city to Aragorn in that moment. And then maybe you have a civil war that comes about after the War of the Ring. But you're right. I think maybe there's at least a reason to think that perhaps he would have been, you know what? I'm more experienced. I'm wiser. I will relent in this moment.
I think, though, that Denethor would never have listened to Boromir, though. I think Denethor was too set in his ways. Boromir would have, but I think that Denethor might have gone just as crazy because he was jealous of Aragorn, and to see his eldest son, whom he idolized, kneel before Aragorn and worship him in some way would have, I think, well, I don't have a high opinion of Denethor, but I think that would have sent him schizo. And I think Boromir dipped down. I remember when I first read him, I was impressed with him. I thought he was incredible, but I thought that he was coming in a long. I kind of thought of him as Sigmundur, in a way, like as almost that same archetype.
Okay.
A great hero, but he ultimately, like a rusty sword breaks eventually. But that the intent was that Boromir always had good intent, I guess. But anyways,
we do get a lot of passages in the films. A lot of what we're seeing here between Gandalf and Frodo, Peter Jackson puts in a conversation in Moria, and so we see he kind of moves it farther back in time, just because it's a visual medium, and you want to have stuff. Yeah. Anyway, he changed that order of things, but a lot of these passages in this exposition scene do show up, particularly in the Moria bit. But there's one bit of dialogue that it's in the films, but it's not quite as explicit. It just basically gets truncated in the film. The text is he's saying behind that there was something else at work beyond any design of the Ringmaker. I can put it no plainer than by saying that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and not by its maker. And so by the not by its maker part, where we're basically getting Eru introduced into the story, Iluvatar.
I always read that part as it being the will of the ring.
Okay, well, see, I was thinking that, in other words, the ring wants to get back to Sauron, and it's using its will, but there's another will working to say, instead, Bilbo's going to find this ring, and it's going to get pulled into, in a different direction.
How I kind of read it or interpreted it was the ring wanted Bilbo to get it out of the mountain.
Sure. Yeah, get me out of the mountain. I got you.
And, like all the rumors around Bilbo, everything starts to circulate. But it's Eru also working here so that the ring thinks it's its own will that's influenced things, but in reality, it's really Eru, I guess you could say. That's always how I kind of looked at it.
I hear you. But then he mentions, Gandalf does then go on to say, in which case you being Frodo, were also meant to have it, which is an encouraging thought. The idea being that there is something other than evil
the ring
working on the fate of the ring. But if you're doing that, which I feel, obviously he was a very religious person, Tolkien was Catholic, and there's this religious sense here. I just feel like it's a tightrope to walk, because if you make everything part of Eru's plan, there's really nothing for our heroes to achieve, right? It's just like, they're puppets going through the motions. So I think Tolkien does a really good job of keeping Eru's influence mysterious in the background, and leaving still peril and things to do for our heroes.
Yeah, I think that one should refer to a teaching of Takuin So from Japan, a Zen Buddhist monk, who, at least in the Vagabondo manga, once, and I think this is from his actual teachings, Takuin So teaches that everything is perfectly decided, but you also have perfect freedom to decide. And that somehow everything is already ordained, but you have complete freedom at the same time. And I think that's how we're supposed to look at it. Like, Eru is preordaining, but on the other hand, the characters have like 50 different options of what they want to do. It's just the road's already been set. One road will lead that way, another will lead in a different direction and whatnot. And it's their choice to walk it. Once they set the first step on that path, they're down that path. And that Eru's just kind of lit the road, so to speak. I don't know if that's making any sense.
Okay. No, I like that. I see what you're saying. There's autonomy within this larger structure. There's like a structure,
Yeah.
and then within it, and plus there is a different force at work here, which is the Ring and Sauron, and they're trying to pull against it. So
now
there's chance.
Now, for any creatives or artists, now Tolkien often noted this, and I've noted this as well in my own writing, is now Eru is the author of the world of Arda, so to speak. This is a metaphor that's kind of used. And now every artist knows that when you start writing, the story starts to take on a life of its own and kind of takes control of you, even as you are trying to guide it along the plan that you have for the chapter. So that this could also be argued what's happening. Eru is letting the story tell itself, even as he's guiding it, so to speak.
This entire question of, are you the writer or are you the medium?
Yeah. Very much
well
so.
phrased.
Yeah, very well phrased, Dan. You've used that phrasing before. But anyways, on page 56 of the Red Book edition, it's referenced that the murder of Deagle haunted Gollum. Now, I'm not going to condemn Gollum here, but we later see that did. But in The Hobbit, we see no hint of this haunting because The Hobbit was written first. But Gandalf found this out after he helped to capture Gollum, and Gollum was imprisoned for a time. And the thing is, it's mentioned that Smeagol's grandmother was a great matriarch, but the trouble is that, like I said, Gollum just would try to rationalize what he had done, and apparently felt that Deagle should have given him the birthday present, so to speak. But the trouble is, as we noted before, you're supposed to give gifts on your birthday, not receive them, according to Hobbit tradition.
I find it really interesting, this particular passage. It doesn't say as much to me about Smeagol as it does about Gandalf, because we get this reminder that in D&D terms, Gandalf is not lawful good. He admits basically to torturing Gollum. He says, I endured him as long as I could, but the truth was desperately important, and in the end I had to be harsh. I put the fear of fire on him and wrung the true story out of him bit by bit, together with much sniveling and snarling. You're like, oh, okay then. So Gandalf, there's a bit of a mean streak in there.
Yeah, he's a grumpy old wizard. But Gandalf, I think the idea with him here is the same as what Lewis used with Aslan, although Howard doesn't have it worded this way, but he does express this idea in his stories. Conan and Aslan are good, but not safe. And Gandalf is supposed to be good, but not safe, I guess you could say. Okay. And the idea being that a force of good is not safe. Goodness is not safety itself. It's something a little, it's like it's worded in, I think, in Jurassic Park about nature. It has to break out of barriers, sometimes violently so. And I think that's the idea here. Gandalf is not being very nice, but it's for the greater good to an extent. On the other hand, he notes that I don't think I've got it noted on my in my notes. Oh, it's on page 59. But anyways, apparently Gollum would lick his fingers, and it's interesting that his fingers had been damaged by the enemy because Sauron lost one of his fingers, and Frodo later loses a finger. So fingers are obviously important here. And it's interesting that there's so much importance attached to fingers as well. They're how a writer might write, an artist might paint, and many men might do their craft.
Right. It's how you interact with the world.
Yeah, yeah, and it's how Italians speak.
Well, it's even there's a bit later. I think it's I forget where it is now. It's not in this chapter, but where Gollum talks about being tortured by Sauron and being tortured by Sauron in person, and the reason he knew is because he was being tortured by someone with 9 fingers. He remembered there was a finger that had been removed, so it's one of the few times we get to see there's some physical form of Sauron that has 9 fingers.
Yep, and we find out that the wild elves, the wood elves, tracked Golem down, and that they received aid from Aragorn.
This is where we first hear of Aragorn.
Yep.
Which is it's a great line there where he says, "The greatest traveler and huntsman of this age of the world." You're like, okay. You're setting this guy up. We don't know anything else about him right now, but he's a friend of Gandalf, and he's an amazing huntsman. You're like, all right, got it.
Yeah, and he's a great traveler. And the traveler bit is something I find that very peculiar that people tend to forget about.
He did a lot of, he kind of did a spy, he was a spy, essentially, going around and checking out all the different realms in the pre-Lord of the Rings days.
Yeah. And archetypally, Aragorn here is already established in the same way that...
good point, Mark. Gandalf would certainly be a greater traveler, yes.
Now, Conan is called a reaver, a bandit, and a slayer. And that he trod across the entire world and upon every throne until he reached the crown of Aquilonia. But the thing is, Aragorn is talked about in much the same way Conan is in the Hyborian Age mythos. So it's very interesting how similar the two are, but also how different. So I just like the reference to Aragorn, as he's one of my top favorite characters.
We'll catch up with him in a couple of chapters.
Yeah.
There's also this dialogue that comes in about it's hugely important. It frames in some ways one of the major arcs of the trilogy, and it's where Frodo begins with, "What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had the chance." And this begins, as I say, one of the most important emotional arcs. Frodo learning about empathy / pity. I call it empathy. Tolkien refers to it as pity, but through Gollum.
Tomato.
Smeagol is me, Frodo. Smeagol could be me. In a different scenario, I could be this individual. And this quote pays off much later. We're talking 2 towers, so stay tuned. We're going to get there.
Eventually.
One day we'll get there. And when we do, Frodo says, he's talking about Gollum, and he says, "I'm still afraid. And yet, as you see, I will not touch the creature. For now that I see him, I do pity him." And so it goes from a pity that Bilbo didn't kill him to I pity him. And that change, that connection is everything to what makes Frodo able to resist the power of the ring. It's the quality that Gandalf values most in hobbits. It's a big deal.
I think that this arc from a pity he did not kill him to I pity him is a great deal of Frodo's arc.
Yep.
As he goes, now this is going to sound interesting. This is going to sound weird, but there's a theory that within every person, there's a side that's civilized and there's a side that's savage. And this is something that Howard championed in his Conan literature, not to always refer back to that, but
good point, Mark, by the way. He's talking about Aragorn versus being a spy versus a defender of what would become his kingdom. I like that. I like that idea too. Yeah.
Frodo,
spy's a little mean.
Frodo goes from having a touch of that violence in him to losing it, but in a way that's very fascinating. As he's filled with pity for Golem. But what was your thoughts, Dan, on that quote of "he deserves death," and how Gandalf reacts with "deserves it"? I dare say he does, but don't go casting. No, like don't go condemning him without knowing his experience and seeing him. What do you think of all this?
It's rather inexperienced of Bilbo and of Frodo, and this is something that youth tend to judge very easily. For example, in the Prydain series, Taran goes through some of this, where he judges someone else as that, why should I pity him? He betrayed me. He did this. He did this.
I think you're referring to Gurki, right? At least early on, and then he comes around to loving Gurki.
Yeah, and Gurki in the book of in the Prydain series is a bit more of a reverse Golem. He looks like a pitiable creature, but he's a creature of pure good who doesn't have a selfish bone in his body.
Except where food is concerned. Yeah.
But and like Frodo, Taran has to come around to it and realize this is a creature to be pitied. So
yeah, he's Frodo's just grown up hearing the story about, there was this essentially a monster, and Bilbo survived and managed to get away with the ring. And so in his mind, it's like, it's this other thing. It's this thing to be feared. And, if only he had killed it off, then we wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. He doesn't think of it as an individual, as an entity. It had its own past. As it turns out, it was a cousin of hobbits. It was, it's me. So it's a big necessary learning curve for him.
What I like is that we find out Bilbo had Golem kind of at his mercy at one point, but Bilbo was filled with pity. Bilbo could not kill such a creature, and I think Frodo being in the same situation and making the same decision later on is him following in the footsteps of Bilbo in a way, as it's another connection between adoptive father and son. But what's more, and in a way, no, never mind that thought. But anyways, what's interesting about on page 60 of the Red Book edition is that Gandalf at one point tells Frodo, "You see, already you too, Frodo, cannot easily let it go, nor will to damage it. And I could not make you except by force, which would break your mind. But as for breaking the ring, force is useless." But anyways, what's interesting is that he could not make Frodo give up the ring except through some measure of force that would break Frodo's mind, which I've heard people say that what was Gandalf's plan once they arrive at Mount Doom to break Frodo's mind and force him to get rid of the ring. I don't think I agree. I don't agree with that theory. I don't think Gandalf would have broken Frodo's mind, and I think that Gandalf was kind of in a position of where he was thinking, all right, I don't know what I'm going to do when we get there, but I don't even know if we'll make it there. I'll cross that bridge when I get to it.
Right. It's a just solve the immediate problem.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what is the movie The Martian, where Matt Damon has to solve one problem. I've solved the problem for the next hour. Got it. Okay. Now, the next hour's out. Okay. Solve that problem. Okay.
Exactly.
Now we're on to hour 3 to solve that problem. And so the problem now is, how do we get this ring out of the Shire, and maybe we head for Rivendell, where we can try to figure out what to do with it there. Let's move. Let's go. Yeah.
And it's at this point we get the oh my gosh, my throat. The Engalagan the Black reference, which you love so much and I love so much.
Yeah. Loved it. That was awesome. I think Hasbo, he may not still be on anymore, but he was commenting. He really likes hearing the Elder Days references, and this would be one of them for sure. And Calagan the Black.
Yeah. And speaking personally, while I love Lord of the Rings, I actually prefer Silmarillion by a long
There's
shot.
there's some amazing stories there, for sure.
Yeah. But all right. So, anyways, I'm just gonna look to my notes. Oh, now there is one quality of Frodo's that's interesting. That's shown on page 62 of the Red Book edition. Is that Frodo doesn't like the idea of leaving the Shire, but he will go if he has to. And this has Gandalf pleased and amused and just,
Right. It's Gandalf didn't realize Gandalf thought he was going to have to create a whole. There was much longer in his debate. Like I'm going to have to really come around to convincing him to leave because he's a hobbit who likes to stay in the Shire, and this is going to be a big deal. And instead, Frodo's like, "Yes, I guess I got to go to save everybody. So, okay, when do we leave?" What? Oh, okay, that was easy.
I don't have to drop a entire group of dwarves on him.
Right, exactly. I don't have to have them all come to visit. Scar your door again with a big symbol.
Oh, and I think he was worried about Frodo being worried about handkerchief, like Bilbo was.
That's right.
But he gives Frodo the pseudonym Mr. Underhill rather than Mr. What was it? Anderson from The Matrix.
Oh, Mr. Anderson. Hi, Thomas, by the way. Thomas, good friend of the channel. He's asking, did Gandalf have a plan past Rivendell?
I don't think he did.
I mean, he's talking about destroying the ring. He's talking about how the only way to destroy it is, So I guess in some ways he had the idea of we're not going to use it. And in fact, when Frodo offers it to him, he's like, "Bup, bup, bup, bup." So he's decided we can't use it, and I think he's decided we can't hide it. So we're going to have to destroy it. So I guess maybe he doesn't have the actual plan of we got to, but he, in the abstract, he's like, we're going to have to get it to Mount Doom.
Yeah, I think Gandalf mostly saw it as we have to go from the Shire to Rivendell. From there, bear in mind, he ends up having the sense that Moria is key and that they have to get to Lorien. So he kind of, says, all right, we're going to have to go through there.
Let's go just chat with the wise elves, whether that be Elrond or Galadriel. Somebody's going to have a good idea for this.
Yeah,
maybe.
And I don't think he had much more of a plan. I think he was kind of making it up as he went along, by necessity. And that this actually lends more to the brilliance of Gandalf because, in a way, he's able to think on the fly and change course when need be, like a good captain of a ship should, and adapt to new situations and whatnot with such brilliance that one might think he planned the entire journey when he didn't. I think that's the nature of the character.
I'm going to let the Balrog catch me by the ankle and pull me off the bridge. This is going to be they're going to bond over this. This is going to be great.
No, I don't think he planned the Balrog. I don't think he ever, I don't think it even occurred to him. But until the Balrog suddenly appeared in front of him and wanted a word with him. Now, as this chat's been going on, we've had a little crook who was neglecting his gardening. Really, how dare he neglect that garden? It ought to be perfect by the time they're done.
But hobbits aren't crooks; they're burglars.
Oh, fair enough. And
I love this bit actually. So yeah, as you say, he's neglecting his gardening.
Now, over the chapter, we've had his shears working. Then sometimes,
you hear him. It's almost like a lawnmower, but he's not mowing. But
there's a few paragraphs where it falls quiet. Then he starts up again, like reminding himself, and like, "Oh wait!"
You can picture him outside, not even at the bushes, just using the clippers, like just in the air, like, "Oh, I'm clipping, all right." But there's this great bit. So obviously Gandalf discovers that someone is eavesdropping, and so he it's a really funny bit. Gandalf says, "How long have you been eavesdropping?" And the response from Sam, who's now just been found out, he's probably terrified of Gandalf anyway. But in this moment, his response is, "Eavesdropping, sir? I don't follow you, begging your pardon. There ain't no eaves at Bag End, and that's a fact." So he's basically like, "I can't be eavesdropping because there's no eaves." Boom! Mic drop.
I've never heard of. I didn't hear you guys talking about bring that ring to Mount Doom.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, that too. Right. I don't know. I didn't hear anything other than everything. But just like the fact that he's doing like some kind of like rhetorical debate class. You said eavesdropping. There's no eaves on this house. So no, I wasn't. Bop, 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 bop. That made me laugh.
Gandalf, don't be a fool. What have you heard and why did you listen? And you have Sam who starts begging and he ends up explaining, I heard a deal that I didn't really I didn't rightly understand about an enemy and rings and Mr. Bilbo, sir, and dragons and a fiery mountain and elves, sir. I listened because I couldn't help myself, if you know what I mean. Lord bless me, sir, but I do love tales of that sort, and I believe them too, whatever Ted may say. Elves, sir, I would dearly love to see them. Couldn't you take me to see elves, sir, when you go?
He's upset. He hasn't upset. We learn a lot actually about Sam in this one. He's the gardener. He's a friend of the family. He's obsessed with elves.
He's an otaku.
And he likes hanging out at the bar telling tales.
So he's basically a Japanese otaku.
Thomas, I like the fake work. I have to make noise. That is how I will succeed at fake gardening.
Yeah. But, well, it's just that by middle of the chapter, he ought to have been finished. But then the shears pick up.
Yeah. Yeah, he has no intent. He's like, if I just hang out by this window, it'll look weird to everyone in town. So instead, oh, look. This leaf needs picking. So yeah. So there we get. Sam is now obviously Gandalf says, "Fine, you're gonna." It works to Gandalf's advantage, assuming Sam can be trusted, which we know he can. But to say like this will actually also give Frodo, it's the answer to the one obstacle keeping Frodo around, which is I'm going out on my own. Like, oh my God, can I do this? I don't know that I can just suddenly. He's been the master of Bag End. I'm going to have to leave my name. I'm going to have to leave Bag End and leave it all behind me. Can I do this by myself? Well, it turns out you don't have to. Here's your good friend Sam. Go. So it works.
Yep. Yeah, and Sam looks at this as a reward when, in a way, Gandalf is punishing him, indeed, as he says. As what Sam's going to have to go through is unimaginable.
It's true. You cut to the end. You're like, oh my God, why did I listen at this door? Yeah.
But the thing
Thank goodness he did. So there you go.
From what I understand it, I think from the letters, Tolkien mentions that Sam is inspired by some of the Batmen he had in World War I who saved his life.
Right.
And now the Tolkien film actually has the Batman literally named Sam, but the thing, I don't know if that's historically accurate, but Sam-wise is inspired by these Batmen who would follow around the lieutenants, and
as opposed to Batman, we're talking like a Batman.
Yeah. Tolkien was not followed around by Bruce Wayne. And
there was a billionaire playboy who would lived in the Shire, had a cape. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was really cool, and he just didn't like sunlight. But he had like 3 girlfriends running around with him, and he threw batarangs at the German soldiers. Yeah, but
I like this, Joe. The like a dog invited for a walk. It is a funny line.
Yeah, it is. But it's a good comparison because Sam is like a dog. Dogs are loyal, kind, and will never give up on you.
It's great. It's a great point. I just did my video on Huon. So speaking of loyal dogs.
I loved it. That was a great video.
Yeah. That was a fun breakdown.
Yeah, Homebody has it right. Military valets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, I'll just quickly.
So that is chapter 2.
I was gonna ask, what did you guys think?
Yeah. Any? I know you guys have been making great thoughts already on your chapter 2 thoughts, but is there? Oh, there we go. Yeah, who on the bestest boy?
Yep,
I like him. But yeah, do you guys have any final thoughts on Chapter 2 out there in YouTube land?
And Dan, I'll ask Dan.
Yeah, more like a trip to the vet. Yeah, it is more like a trip to the vet.
Sam is so eager to go adventuring. And yes, I'm making a lot of references to Bradane, but Terran being like, oh, I want to go on this adventure. They want to be heroes. But a while back, I had the mentality, I don't want to be a hero. Because to be a hero means to suffer.
Greatly.
Sacrifice.
Greatness and sacrifice and suffering are all tied in together. And yeah.
Absolutely Batman.
What did you think of But Dan, what did you think of the overall chapter?
There is a lot of information. And it is something that I probably would not recommend reading it all at once.
No.
Reading it in pieces.
Well, that's the interesting thing about what Tolkien does here, is that he breaks it up into
Bye, Homebody, by the way, and thank you so much for enjoying our thoughts.
See you around, Homebody. Hope you subscribe to our channel. Really loved your thoughts.
Please do. Please subscribe to the Brothers Arda.
Oh, thank you.
And Mark, it's a good thought here on describing the summing up the chapter. It's Gandalfpedia before going on the adventure.
Yes. Gandalfpedia should have been what Tolkien Gateway was called. But what's interesting is that Tolkien breaks it up into mini sections. So maybe what Tolkien was partly thinking was this is how we're supposed to read it in these little almost sub-chapter sections. Because
you do also I feel like there's another exposition chapter coming, but it's spaced out. It's the Council of Elrond, right? The Council of Elrond is another big exposition that's on its way. But this one, centered it is, as I mentioned up front, these kind of chapters in lesser hands, they can really drag. They can really pull your story down. But because it's Tolkien and he's got Gandalf and he's got this amazing rich, it's like he's describing events like in Calagon the Black, for instance. These are things he knows about. They're not just words. He knows the freaking entire history of Calagon the Black. So when he's talking about this history, he's giving you this little hint into his mind. And so it makes it really fascinating instead of being just talk, dictionary page. Yeah, you say Gandalfpedia. It's interesting. It's engaging despite being this big info dump.
Yeah. What did you think of the chapter, Matt?
Yeah, I'm a fan of it. I really am. Because there's so much lore. I'm just like I'm a junkie for the lore. And so anytime that he brings up something, whatever, anyway, there's all kinds of little lore crammed into various chapters. This one obviously has way more than most, but I'm all for it.
Yeah. First time I read it, I remember loving it. And then the next time I read it after reading the Silmarillion, I loved it even more.
Yeah. As Thomas says, it's layered, subtle, rich, and in unexplained detail. Yeah.
That's actually the perfect description of it. Thank you, Thomas.
It's a fascinating chapter, and it puts you into this wider story. It's an epic, and now we're focusing the epic. So we're like, look, this story exists outside these pages, and here we're going to tell this part.
Yeah,
this is where we're going to try to take the ring, and it's just like, oh yeah, I'm in. I'm into the wider story.
What Tolkien does is he zeroes it down onto one detail, but then expands it back out, then zeroes back in the same chapter. And he does this multiple times, and it's just such a wonderful, wonderful technique of storytelling.
Agreed.
And of exposition. And here, I know it sounds weird, but I actually like exposition in books and in film. I hate it when people say, well, what purpose does exposition serve? Well, you need the information for the tale. Otherwise, you're left flailing around in the dark. And Tolkien understands we need info dumps every once in a while. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of this chapter. And we have Homebody. Some of the more straight ahead channels don't like my comments. Chris at Philosopher's Game is way cool too. Oh yeah, he likes Dorklords also. I'll mention Bros Art on his live stream. Oh, sure. I love Chris. He's so kind.
In the dark.
The only thing is with Chris is I have the same complaint that I do with Dorklords in that you guys are not getting the growth you deserve because you've both been at this for a very long time, it seems to me. And yet his channel seems trapped at 40-some thousand, yours at 4,000 or so. So it'd be great if YouTube could just push, like
Joy mentions hit the like button. Thank you, Joy.
Yeah.
Appreciate that comment. Yeah. It is one of those things where I'm kind of doing it. I think I'd be talking about this stuff anyway, even without a camera in front of me. So it's just something I enjoy doing, and it just so happens to be like, you know what? There's a platform where you can put these videos out there. Let's do it. So I could probably be better at marketing and all that kind of stuff, but I enjoy doing this, and the fact that we get followers like this. You guys have been here the whole 2 hours with us. It's more than I expected. In fact, one of the reasons I haven't done live before, I'll admit, there's a few reasons, a lot of variables, but one of the variables is I can imagine myself doing a live stream and no one's there, and it's just me like, all right, we're gonna take some questions. Okay, well, looks like I'll ask myself a question. Hey, Matt, what did you think of that chapter? I thought it was pretty good, Matt. Oh, great. Anyway, so it's actually very heartwarming that there are actually a whole lot of folks out there who are like, yeah, I'll follow this along. So that's really cool. I had a fear for no reason. I'm like Frodo. I should leave the Shire. But anyway, so this is it. This is me stepping outside the Shire. I'm headed to Bree. Next chapter, I'll be. Well, actually, we're going to be joining close to Bree anyway. But yeah, that's me. I'm on my way. On my way to the journey. But yeah, so next time we meet, it'll be through the Brothers Arda channel. I'll put a link to this, and if you guys want to follow us over there, I'll put it back on the playlist here. We'll keep it all together. But chapter 3, which is 3 is Company, not Three's Company, 1970 sitcom starring John Ritter. So not that. It's 3 is Company. It's another excellent chapter. We're past the exposition. The action's moving forward. And I'll say this real fast. It's actually pretty irrelevant because this chapter mentions how Frodo was celebrating his birthday over time. His birthday actually is coming up. Hobbit Day. September 22nd. And so just so you guys know, there is a Hobbit Day collaboration playlist coming on YouTube. Every year, for the last few years, the Tolkien YouTube community has gotten together for a Hobbit Day playlist. My video, which I have recorded and am now in the morass of editing, is a theory crafting around a single sentence from chapter 1 of The Hobbit. It was often said in other families that long ago, one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. Ba ba ba. It's all. I'm way into it. I just deep dive. So anyway, that's my Hobbit Day video.
Definitely going to look forward to that. We did.
Thomas asks, "Is Paul watching?" Paul, notoriously not a huge Tolkien fan, happens to be my partner on Dorklords. So I always antagonize him with, this is a lot like Lord of the Rings. So anyway, I have a feeling Paul is probably not watching, but I'll tape his eyes open and make him watch this later.
Yeah.
And Joy is Paul's sister, right? She's like, I'm Paul's sister. He's not a Tolkien fan. So yeah.
Well, funny enough, Dan didn't start off a Tolkien fan, so I ended up roping him into reading Silmarillion. In return, I had to start reading Prydain, and I'm going to have to finish the entire series because even though I'm not a Prydain fan, so like he chooses one book series, I choose one for a different channel or whatever. So we did a lot of content on Brothers Krynn, and now we're having to move it to Brothers Arda. So for those who end up going out there, it's going to take some time to transport everything. We're going to be reposting soon our last year's Hobbit Day video because why not? And just before Hobbit Day. And Hobbit Day itself, we're doing a more a reading of the text, like with I don't want to say theory crafting, but like a certain interpretation to how the hobbits are able to break free of the control of Sauron or Sharky in the Scouring of the Shire, and just some of the interplay and philosophy there. Actually, Dan was the one who came up with a lot of the ideas for it.
Nice.
And I wrote a portion of the script, and he reads most of it, I believe. And it was a fun video because we often kind of both do it. We kind of join forces together on Hobbit Day and Tolkien Day. Whereas for Howard Days, since there's 2 days to Howard Day, one after the other, Dan does one video, I do the other. That's how that works. But the thing with the Hobbit Day and the Tolkien Day, we always have to divide the script in half, with me just typing in Dan and Joe, whatnot. But yeah, I love when Matt teases Paul about Lord of the Rings. Cracks me up. Maybe someday Paul will get wise and read Lord of the Rings.
That's right. We're gonna make him a convert. We'll never make him a convert, but we're gonna try. We're gonna keep trying. Hope springs eternal. But yeah. So that said, there will be very soon Hobbit Days coming around. There'll be more videos. Go to the Brothers Arda. You guys have all kinds of videos, particularly about Conan series, and we'll be back on their channel. Talking
just
about
to clarify, the Brothers Hiborian is where we put our Conan stuff.
Okay, right. Sorry, there's a separate channel. My bad. Yeah. So Brothers Arda, what is on Brothers Arda typically?
It's Silmarillion, Hobbit stuff. Currently, we're reposting our Hobbit book club from like 2 years ago. There, we're reposting our Silmarillion book club.
Nice.
There, lots and lots of Silmarillion stuff. I love the Silmarillion. It's my favorite book ever. So lots of that. It's all getting transferred. We just did a philosophy and morality of Middle Earth video that got reposted there. That one's proving pretty popular. So yeah, it's basically exploring the inner workings of Tolkien's legendarium. I did a timeline of Tolkien's literature, like of his writing. That was pretty fun. So that's been reposted there. So yeah, it's mostly Silmarillion stuff because I'm an addict.
Tolkien nerddom. I like it. It's a pleasure as always talking to you, Joe. Dan, awesome to meet you, and hopefully we can chat again for Chapter 3. Good sir.
So smash that like button here and the subscribe button if you haven't already here on Dorklords and over at Brothers Arda, as though you were Sauron trying to take down Gil-galad.
That's right. Exactly like that. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening. It was such a pleasure. And thanks for all of you out there with your comments. They were awesome. And I don't know why I didn't do live streams earlier. See, my fear was for nothing. So
you've done a great job, Matt. You did a great job.
You too. You
greatly
guys are awesome.
Appreciated.
Yeah. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.
Oh, other hand.